So, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining me this morning, especially after what was potentially an exciting but late evening last night. I'm Jess. I'm a product manager on the Daydream developer platform team. On Tuesday, you heard Nathan talk at the keynote about Daydream, which is Google's new platform for high-quality mobile VR. And just a few weeks ago, we announced the Pixel phone and the Daydream View, which is our take on what we think that mobile VR can really be like today. So for months, we've been obsessing over these details, trying to make sure that the phone is built just right so that it's really great for VR, that we create a viewer that's lightweight and comfortable so you can wear it on your face for a really long time, to building a controller that's both accessible for new users and really expressive and interactive for developers. But as excited as we are about the upcoming launch, at Google, our mission is to create VR for everyone, is to take the world's experiences, real or imagined, and make them accessible to everyone. And for that, having just great hardware is not enough. So we can put a gazillion of these viewers on people's heads, and if that's all we did, we would have inspired a really impressive fashion trend. But we will not actually have gotten that many people to experience these really amazing VR applications. So nothing is more important to our mission of VR for the success of the platform than the content. So on the Daydream team, we believe fundamentally that people aren't going to be buying the hardware for the hardware's sake, but for the experiences that the hardware enables. And we know that the majority of these experiences is not going to be created at Google. It's going to be created by developers like yourselves. So today, this talk is really about helping explain the platform to you so that you can get started creating great content. All right, to help you understand what you'll be working with, I'll start with the basics, the fundamentals of how Daydream works and how we think about the Daydream platform. Now, a lot of you probably think about platforms in terms of hardware. But the most important platform is the computer right here. Our minds are fundamental to the functioning of VR. And in fact, VR is largely about tricking our minds into believing that we're somewhere we're not. The central systems that are involved in this are your ocular system and your vestibular system, your inner ear, which senses acceleration and motion. And in the real world, there's essentially no delay between when your ear senses something and when your eyes actually see something. So that when I lean around, or if I'm in a car that's starting or stopping, there's perfect sync between those two systems. The challenge, though, when you're talking about VR, and especially on phones, is that you have a lot of systems in between when your ear senses something and when your eyes see something. And as soon as you move your head, your inner ear picks up that motion. But then the sensors on the phone have to be able to register that movement. They have to then shuttle that to the SoC, which needs to process and run your application. And then it needs to render that out to the phone before your eyes can actually see anything. And that can take tens to hundreds of milliseconds since your ear felt it. And the longer that takes, the more likely and intensely you are to experience simulator sickness. So the gold standard for this latency is getting it under 20 milliseconds of what we call MOTOPHO, or motion to photon latency, which is the term to describe this latency between when your ear feels something and your eyes see something. And when you get under that 20 milliseconds, most people actually can't perceive the difference. And they feel as if their ears are feeling exactly what their eyes are seeing. There's also the fundamental challenge in mobile VR, which is that we're all building experiences on devices that are battery powered, but we're kind of greedy and we want them to be as immersive and as compelling as experiences that are designed for a computer that's plugged into your local power plant. So that's a huge energy differential that we have to make up. So we really have to be extra clever and extra creative in how we build the platform. And for developers, you have to do the same in how you work with silicon and the software to make that experience really fast. OK, so we need the experience to be really low latency, but it still has to be amazing while operating on battery power. And at the same time, we want it to be really accessible so as many people as possible can experience VR. So that's the stage on which we built Daydream. So at the core of all this, the actual computing platform is the phone itself. And the Google Pixel is the first Daydream Ready phone, the first phone capable of running VR at a standard that we believe is necessary to create a really fantastic experience. And what Daydream Ready certification means is that it's a guarantee. It's a guarantee that when a user goes to a store and buys a Daydream Ready phone, all the Daydream Ready apps that they buy and install are going to run really, really well. So we include in certification really key components, making sure that there are low persistence, high resolution displays, really high performance SoCs that are powerful enough to create the experiences that you want, and that it has low latency, high quality sensors for incredibly smooth head tracking. And so there's obviously a lot more to it than just this, but essentially what we're saying is that we're trying to make sure that all the hardware fundamentals are consistent and high quality. But what's really important to emphasize is that it's not just about the Google Pixel phone. Daydream Ready is actually about a spec for an entire family of phones that are ready for VR. And what that means for developers while you're creating apps is that you're going to be developing for a lot of Daydream Ready devices made by all the major Android manufacturers, from Samsung to HTC to LG, and many, many more that are going to be coming out throughout next year. Now, all that hardware is great, but you really need great software. You need an OS designed for VR to take advantage of all those hardware capabilities. And VR mode for Android is what we did with that. So in VR mode, you get sustained performance, which means that we just help manage the SoC in a way that makes appropriate trade-offs between computation and thermal dissipation, so that once you get into VR, you can stay in VR for a long time. You automatically get great head tracking. And because this is still fundamentally your phone, we want to make sure that if you get a call from your mom while you're playing a video game, you don't get a notification in mono, because that's really disruptive, right? Instead, you have built-in system UI that will render all your notifications in stereo, so you can choose whether or not you want to take that phone call from your mom, or if you want to wait until after you shoot a couple more zombies, maybe. And finally, the thing that we really focused on is low latency, which we brought down to less than the 20 milliseconds we talked about by adding things like single buffer rendering, asynchronous reprojection, and so you can target lower frame rates and still have it feel like a really smooth experience. So a phone is great, but without a viewer, it's still not really VR. So Daydream View is the first Daydream-compatible headset. It's our reference design for what a viewer on this platform should be like. And what's really interesting is that we put almost all of our focus on the comfort and the ergonomics of the viewer. So there's actually no electronics in the viewer itself. You can actually wash it if you want to, which I think is also great. So it's really meant to be strapped to your face. It's designed to be soft and comfortable, so you can wear it for as long as you want to stay in VR. And it's also designed to be super easy to use and get into VR, especially for people who haven't really approached the medium before. So all you have to do is drop your phone in, and we use NFC detection to automatically figure out when to auto-launch you into VR. There are some physical alignment dots that just do some automatic calibration, so even if your phone is a little off when you put it in, we're still going to make sure to render things in a way that it looks centered. So Daydream View comes with a controller, because VR is as much about interaction as it is about the graphics. And the controller, as you can see, is where we think a lot of the magic of Daydream comes in. It looks very simple, and that's because it is. There's a clickable touchpad, just a couple of buttons. On the top is an app button, which as an app developer, you can do anything you want with. And below that is the home button, which we reserve for some system actions like recentering the controller or taking you from the app experience back into the home launcher. There are 2 volume buttons on the side, so you don't have to awkwardly try to do this while the viewer is on your head. But really importantly, the thing that's really cool is that there's a 9-axis IMU that gets you both 3 DOF control and accelerometer and gyro information. And really importantly, the controller and the viewer are sold together. So for those of you who have dealt with input fragmentation on other platforms in the past, do they have a controller, do they not have a controller, which controller are they using? With Daydream, we've tried to simplify that a lot, so we can make you a hard guarantee that every user who's opening your application has one of these controllers in his or her hand. Now, we're not saying that you can also support additional inputs. If you want to use a gamepad, that's totally fine. But it does mean that you can absolutely rely on the fact that all Daydream users will at least have this mode of input. All right, so the phone and the viewer and the controller combine together to create and bring users into VR experiences. But that's not actually all of the platform. Because we know that while you want to build great apps, you also want to make a living building these apps. And so we've put a lot of thought into a couple of other important aspects of the platform. And the first of these is discovery. And discovery is all about Daydream Home, which is the experience that users will see immediately after they put on the headset and get into VR. So on the top row, the 3 tiles are what we call discovery windows. And it's a curated selection of content that we can use to promote really new and original content on Daydream. And what's really cool, though, is that we can promote not just apps, but we can actually promote experiences within your apps. So that means that if you've built something and you've invested in it and you've created additional content for it, more levels, more episodes, anything like that, you can also have the opportunity to be featured again and again. And VR users today are really hungry for new content. They're looking for it all the time. So we've just made sure to invest the time to make it easy for them to find the stuff that you're building. But of course, discovery is great, but you also want people to be able to purchase and install your applications. So we've actually brought all of the Google Play Store into VR. So this means that users can browse content, purchase content, install content, all while staying in VR. And that's actually a really frictionless, smooth, fantastic experience, and it doesn't break any of their immersion. But more than that, being on Google Play also means that we can take advantage of the entire Google Play platform. And that gets us a ton of stuff for free. For example, dozens of local payment methods around the world. Over 190 different countries that you can distribute your application in. A bunch of great deep analytics for how users are engaging with your software. It can help you figure out different customer acquisition methods and how they're performing relative to each other. There's customer feedback, reviews, all of that. And Google Play also currently has over 1 billion 30-day active users. Now, before anybody says anything, I'm not trying to say that these are all VR users. I'm not trying to make that claim. But what I am trying to say is that Daydream is trying to operate at Android scale. Daydream intends to operate at Android scale when we say that we want a lot of users to be using Daydream Ready phones. And how this is going to work is just your typical smartphone evolution. So today's high-end phones that can run Daydream experiences become next year's mid-range phones, become the following year's possibly low-end phones. So you can see that after just a few years, we can actually get users using Daydream Ready phones on Android scale, ready to consume the experiences that you're building for our mobile VR platform. But we also know that a lot of you don't just have free-to-play games, you don't just have premium games, you have all sorts of business models. So we've committed to bringing in-app purchasing to Daydream on the day that it launches. So regardless of whether you're freemium or premium or try before you buy, you can bring both your content and your business model to Daydream. All right, so that's the platform and the hardware components that you're going to be working with. But you're developers, and you probably actually want to make things and know about how things work. So now I'm going to go into a quick overview about how you can get started building a Daydream app in Unity. To make development really easy, we've partnered with Unity to make sure that Daydream is natively supported. And that native support is publicly available today in the technical preview, which you can download from that link. You're also going to want to get our Google VR SDK for Unity, which includes a bunch of different plugins on top of the native integration that provides a lot of things like input handling. It provides utilities like an ARM model and support for 360 video, a lot of goodies like that. So you'll definitely want to get that as well and use both of them. And as we announced on Tuesday, we're really excited to say that the native integration is going to be part of Unity mainline as of 5.6. So for all successive versions of Unity, Daydream support is going to be baked right in. All right, so as a Unity developer, getting started is super easy. When you create a new project, you just go to the Android tab under Player Settings, because Daydream is built on Android. You find the virtual reality support checkbox, and you enable that. And we actually support both Daydream and Cardboard. And Unity lets you build one APK that can run on multiple different platforms. But for the purposes of this talk, when it asks you to select an SDK, just make sure that you pick Daydream as the platform. And that'll expose to you a bunch of additional options that are custom to the integration. So some of these things include, So some of these things include setting your bit depth of your depth buffer, sustained performance mode. So if you're a really long running app, like a movie playing application, you can have that and you can check that and make sure that your app is going to be OK for a long time in VR. You can also set your foreground and your background icons, which is what's going to be used to display your app in both VR and Daydream Home. And last, you want to make sure that you set the API level correctly. Daydream requires a minimum API level of 24. So just make sure that you have that. And then you're actually ready to go. That's it. You can build and run your app to any Daydream compatible phone, just the way that you normally would in your typical Android workflow. We have a lot more documentation on all of this stuff and a lot of really great samples on the Daydream developer site. But if you're familiar with these tools, you'll be able to get started very quickly. So that's how you get started developing an app for Daydream. But we know that you want to create great apps. And ultimately, there are some fundamentals for development that go beyond just understanding the developer tools. So today, I also want to share with you some insights from our team based on our experiences from building the Daydream launch catalog. And to start, the first insight is that in VR, you want to think about designing for longer user sessions. We call Daydream mobile VR, but the interaction is actually very different from how you think about traditional mobile interactions, where you're generally dealing with a very distracted user. He's either at a bus stop, or she's waiting a couple minutes for a friend to come to lunch, or maybe you're ignoring your pal at breakfast and checking your phone really quickly. But the point is that mobile has evolved in a way that allows for really short and bursty interactions, free-to-play mechanics, all of that stuff, just based on the way that users use it today. And even though you're using a phone, once you put it into the viewer, once you're in VR, we want that becomes transformative. It's a very different experience. Like when the user puts a phone into a viewer and straps a viewer to their head, that actually takes some effort. So once they get into VR, they want to stay in VR. And we want to make sure that we design long-form experiences for them and make it really worth their while. In fact, we've actually done a lot of research on actual users of smartphone VR. In terms of average session time, people are spending 30 to 45 minutes when they're playing games or are using 360 experiences. And they're spending over an hour in VR when they're watching a movie or different TV episodes. So this is just to say that people are spending longer sessions, perhaps a single session and not multiple, but longer sessions when they're in VR. And just as important is the locations that people are spending these sessions in. So as you see, the top two are in the home. And nobody's going to be wearing these viewers out on the street, just FYI. They never have, and they probably aren't going to for a very long time. And so the top two are in the living room and in the bedroom, places we typically classify as safe and comfortable places where you might be reading a book or maybe taking a nap. And what's interesting is that when you design your content, you want to think about the user being in this frame of mind. You want to think about the fact that your app or game is going to be compared in the user's mind against a really great book or a really great movie or a TV show. And you want to make sure that whatever you design is able to stand out against all of that. All right, so you really want to design for longer sessions instead of like the traditional three-minute type sessions that you think about with mobile. Now, while we're on the topic of comfortable spaces, that moves us on to our next point, which is that you want to keep it comfortable. Again, people are using this for a long time, sometimes 30 minutes to an hour at a stretch. So you want to think about content comfort all throughout what they're doing. So a lot of us think that this is what mobile VR is like. You're standing up, and you're active, and you're super engaged. And some of you are actually going to build apps that are that active and that fun. People are going to want to stand up and play tennis or shoot monsters. But actually, a lot of users, and probably a majority of the users, are going to be doing this sitting down. They're going to be seated because that's easier than standing up. That's why you're all seated right now. That's why a lot of VR today is concentrated on seated VR. Especially if they plan to spend longer sessions in it, it's very likely that they're not going to be standing the whole time. So you're thinking like, yeah, OK, that's great. Seated gameplay, yeah, seated interactions. We've done that before. I do that all the time in my office chair. But this is actually a little bit deceptive, that most of us have an office chair at work that we're designing with and testing our apps on something that swivels. So it tricks us into thinking that it's actually really easy to do 360 while you're in VR. But in reality, most people at home are using chairs that look more like this. Chairs that look like this, or beds that don't swivel. Well, this one might swivel because it looks kind of fancy, but the one I have at home definitely doesn't swivel. And that's probably true for a lot of other people, too. And the key point to take away here is that you want to design your content so that it's kept primarily to between like 180 and 210 degrees. So there's a lot to see when you look left, when you look right. You really get the full immersion. Maybe the user will turn around and look behind them if they're curious. But the thing is that even though these systems are capable of 360, you want to think about designing for a lot of people who are primarily going to be not in a swivel chair. And if you don't do that, if you have people looking around all of the time, then they're doing this thing where they're like twisting a lot and turning. And then this is no longer playing. This becomes dancing, and not necessarily the most attractive method of dancing. And more importantly, not a very comfortable method of dancing. So if we do that too much, users get tired, and they're going to leave VR, which is not really the experience we want to give for them. So I'm definitely not saying that you shouldn't use the full range of 360. Definitely take advantage of this. Make your world, make it real, have it feel fantastic. And just be sure to be really mindful about how often you have users turning all the way around. Make sure that we only do it when it really matters. So part of comfort is the motion in your app as well. And on Daydream, we have 3 different ways of describing and rating motion. What you find, which is probably not surprising, is that different people have very different tolerances for simulator sickness. Some people have iron stomachs, and some people, unfortunately, like myself, are a little bit more sensitive and more susceptible. So the safest is what we call no motion. And this is basically like if you're sitting back and you're watching something on Netflix or Hulu, there's very little movement going on, and it's very unlikely that your user is going to get sick. A step above that is moderate motion. And you can think about this as like if they're walking around, if there's some camera translation, but there's no rotation of the camera without the user actually trying to do something. And for most people, moderate motion is going to be totally fine as well. It's not super quick. They're still going to feel comfortable. Now, the last category is what we call intense motion, which is like flying, extreme roller coasters, snowboarding down this giant mountain, moving really fast, and probably the camera's out of the user's control. So this is definitely not a bad thing. Intense motion can be really cool. And in fact, this can be some of the most exciting and most engaging experiences. But just be cognizant that it's definitely going to be the case that some users will literally not have the stomach for it. So just be thoughtful when you're designing your app to try and really strike a balance between comfort and thrills for your user. Also, we tend to think about comfort in terms of simulator sickness. But even when all of that goes really well, VR can still be intimidating. It can actually be very, very scary. So a lot of people, if you put them on top of a tall, narrow tower and you tell them to look down, they're going to scream. They're not going to feel very happy about it because they're afraid of heights. And people have all sorts of fears, right? A lot of people are claustrophobic. They don't like feeling like they're trapped in a small space. They may be agoraphobic, and they don't like being in wide open spaces. And there's definitely the obvious where being stabbed or crushed or killed, even in VR, can be a really visceral experience. So again, as before, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't employ some of these when you're building your application. Horror games are definitely very popular. But just make sure that you're doing it deliberately, that you're not trying to create a super cute, fantastic petting puppies app, and then all of a sudden the user feels like they're going to fall off a mountain. It's probably not what they were expecting. And also, in a lot of cases, you want to use extreme emotional states like this as a way to highlight or accentuate the experience. and something you want to maybe back away from a little bit after you have that, so to have it in spurts, as opposed to being super high fear and intensity all the time, unless you're specifically really targeting the hardcore developer, the hardcore gamer who's really into this stuff. So also for Daydream, you really want to let users use their hands. So think deliberately about how you can leverage the controller. We talked before about how the Daydream controller is really a unique part of the system. There's the clickable touchpad, there's the 2 different buttons, but the motion controls are what are really cool. And these controls are powerful not only because they can express rotation, but when you realize that this is a thing held by a person who has an arm, you can build something that we call an arm model. And the arm model takes the orientation and the rotation from the controller and combines it with a mathematical model of a skeleton so that we can compute translation as well. And for a lot of users, this is going to feel really natural, and it's going to enable you to have a much broader controller vocabulary. So here's an example of some of the apps that use an arm model. And if you look closely, you'll see that the controller is rotating and translating in all of them, but in very different contexts. There's putting a golf club, that's correct, putting a golf club, using a laser pointer, flipping pancakes, swinging a baseball bat. And all of this is possible and really works because these developers combined the controller with the arm model and some creativity and the context of their application. So you might be thinking, simulated skeleton sounds really good, but it also sounds like I'm going to have to do some math. And it's true, there is math involved with the ARM model, but luckily you don't have to do any of it. We're actually going to be releasing a standard version of the ARM model in just a couple weeks as part of our SDK. And we've taken a lot of care to make sure that it's tuned so it feels really good, and also so that it's highly customizable. So you can adjust things like the offset to the elbow, and other things like left and right-handedness are just taken care of for you automatically. So the last insight that I want to share is about audio and the huge role that audio can play in creating a lot of immersion for your app. In VR, we tend to think a lot about graphics, but you can actually create a tremendous amount of emotion, a tremendous amount of presence just through audio. And if you think about immersion per unit watt, like what you get out of processing audio versus processing visuals, what you get out of processing audio is dramatically more effective. So as a quick example, say you want to render a tree, and you want there to be wind rustling through this tree and the leaves to be blowing. It's a beautiful fall scene. Now, you can either render all gajillion leaves in super high fidelity and then animate them so they look like they're moving, or you can have a really simple tree and audio playing that makes it sound like there's wind rustling. And users are actually going to find this just as realistic, if not more realistic, than just the simple visuals. And this is because we actually use our ears all the time in real life, right? Like if you walk down the street and you're not paying attention to a tree and you hear it rustling, you're like, oh yeah, there's a tree rustling. And so it's much easier to convince someone that this is actually happening when you add audio to it. And it's not just the sound effects, but it's the music too. And the music is what makes you feel. So for example, if you think about that really iconic Titanic scene where Jack is standing behind Rose and they're flying at the front of the ship, and there's this romantic ballad playing in the background. Now imagine that scene without the music, and you're just watching this guy stand behind her for 30 seconds, and all you hear is silence and him breathing really heavily. So the scene becomes dramatically different, right? Because music is what makes you feel. It's what really connects the users to the narrative around them. So our SDK also helps you with things like spatialized audio, which feel even more realistic than the standard stereo audio that you get. And also environmental audio, because if you think of a conversation, it sounds very different in a forest than it does in a space station. And so the SDK allows you to do things like choose what kind of room you're in, choose what kind of physical materials are being used. So you can adjust things like occlusion from the trees if there's someone far away from you, or get that really good backslap reverb from the metal of the spaceship if that's where you are. So since our goal is really to create presence, audio lets us do that really efficiently, really creatively. And as mobile developers, we often think of audio as like, oh, we're going to get to it. Well, we'll get to it eventually. Because on mobile, people don't even have their sound on all the time. But especially in VR, you want to make audio one of your top and first priorities. You want to think about it while you're designing your app, and think about how it might even change your approach to what you want to visualize as you're building your app and see if it can simplify it. So I want to end this by saying that as much as we've learned, I really hope that all of you will continue to learn with us. At Daydream, we have something called Daydream Labs, which are just a bunch of different demos that we've tried in VR. And if you're curious about any of that, you can check that out on the website. But I also really encourage you guys to also share the things that you're learning. Go to talks, give talks, and so the entire community can grow and benefit at the same time. So that's all for today. That's Daydream in a nutshell. I hope it was interesting, and I hope that it's inspired you to go out and create some really amazing content and work with us in our mission to create VR for everyone. So thank you very much.